Welcome again. Yes, we are in Joshua 10. Joshua 10. And I would like for you to get your paper, your pencils, and everything ready to take notes and get yourself very comfortable because this is going to be a little long. Not too long, but a little bit long. Okay? So, but we're going to give you a lot of details, a lot of notes to go with it. So, get yourself prepared for that. Also, share this video, like this video, and subscribe to our page. And if you can, donate to our ministry to help so we could help those less fortunate than ourselves. And I have some, you know, not so good news. Somebody stole the trailer that we use to store all the food supplies that we receive, all the dry food supply that we receive, so we could cook for the homeless. It was packed up with supplies. We cook for them because they don't have a place to cook for themselves. So when we see the supplies, we store them in there. We go and we go to auctions and we buy supplies, and we store them. Somebody went and stole the camper, detached it from the van that we drive around with, and took it for themselves, not realizing. I hope when they open it and see everything in it that's for the homeless, the clothes, the homemade soap that we make for them to use, and all the food, they may have a, I don't know, they have a heart. They would return it because obviously at 8 o'clock in the morning, come to somebody's yard and take it. That's not really good. But the devil would do things like that. The devil would do things like that. Okay? So keep them in your prayer. Obviously, they're probably less fortunate than the homeless. Okay? All we know so far is a white man and a white pickup truck with a beard who came to the yard, pull it off, remove it off the van, and put it on his truck and went off with it. You know, that's all we have so far. The camera we have, we're trying to download everything to bring it to the police. Hopefully, we find it. We don't want to push charges, but we do want our supplies back, and we need a trailer back because without it, we can't continue the work that we do. We can't continue to serve the homeless. And I was so disappointed because we couldn't cook for them today because our supplies are gone. So that's not right. But God is in control. So let's continue on with Joshua 10 for the reading. When King Adonizedek of Jerusalem heard how Joshua had taken Ai and had utterly destroyed it, doing to Ai and its king as he had done to Jericho and its king, and how the inhabitant of Gibeon had made peace with Israel, and were among them, he became greatly frightened, because Gibeon was a large city, like one of the royal cities, and was larger than Ai, and all its men were warriors. So King Adonizedek of Jerusalem sent a message to King Hoham of Hebron and King Piran of Jarmuth, to King Japhia of Lachish, and to King Debir of Eglon, saying, "Come up and help me, and let us attack Gibeon, for it has made peace with Joshua and with the Israelites." Then the five kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, and the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon, gathered their forces and went up with all their armies, camped against Gibeon, and made war against it. And the Gibeonites sent to Joshua at the camp of Gilgal, saying, Do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us. For all the kings of the Amorites who live in the hill country are gathered against us. So Joshua went up from Gilgal, he and all the fighting forces with him, all the mighty warriors. The Lord said to Joshua, Do not fear them, for I have handed them over to you. Not one of them shall stand before you. So Joshua came upon them suddenly, having marched up all night from Gilgal. And the Lord threw them into a panic before Israel, who inflicted a great slaughter on them at Gibeon, chased them by the way of the ascent of Beth Horon, and struck them down as far as Azekah and Makkedah. 11. As they fled before Israel, while they were going down the slope of Beth Horon, the Lord threw down huge stones from heaven on them as far as Azekah, and they died. There were more who died because of hailstone than the Israelites killed with the swords. 12. On the day when the Lord gave the Amorites over to the Israelites, Joshua spoke to the Lord, and he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand still at Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? The sun stopped in mid-heaven and did not hurry to set for about a whole day. 14. There has been no day like this before or since, when the Lord heard an, a human voice, for the Lord fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned and all Israel with him to the camp at Gilgal. Meanwhile, these 5 kings fled, hid themselves in the cave at Makkedah. Makkedah. 17. And it was told Joshua, the 5 kings had been found hidden in the cave of Makkedah. Joshua said, Roll large stone against the mouth of the cave, and set men by it to guard them. But do not stay there yourselves. Pursue your enemies and attack them from the rear. Do not let them enter their towns, for the Lord your God has given them into your hand. 20. When Joshua and the Israelites had finished inflicting a very great slaughter on them, until they were wiped out, and when the survivors had entered into the fortified towns, all the people returned safe to Joshua in the camp at Makkedah. No one dared to speak against any of the Israelites. 22. Then Joshua said, Open the mouth of the cave and bring those 5 kings out to me from the cave. They did so and brought the 5 kings out to him from the cave. The king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, the king of Eglon. 24. When they brought the king out to Joshua, Joshua summoned all the Israelites and said to the chief of the warrior who had gone with him, Come near, put your feet on the neck of these kings. Then they came near and put their feet on their neck. And Joshua said to them, Do not be afraid or dismayed. Be strong and courageous, for thus the Lord will do to all the enemies against whom you fight. 26. Afterward Joshua struck them down and put them to death, and he hung them on 5 trees, and they hung on the trees until evening. At sunset Joshua commanded, and they took them down from the tree and threw them into the cave where they had hidden themselves. They set large stone against the mouth of the cave, which remain to this day. 28. Joshua took Makkedah on that day and struck it and its king with the edge of the sword. He utterly destroyed every person in it. He left no one remain. And he did to the king of Makkedah as he had done to the king of Jericho. 29. Then Joshua passed on from Makkedah, and all Israel with him, to Libnah, and fought against Libnah. The Lord gave it also and its king into the hand of Israel, and he struck it with the edge of the sword, and every person in it. He left no one remain in it. And he did to its king as he had done to the king of Jericho. 31. Next Joshua passed on from Libnah, and all Israel with him, to Lachish, and laid siege to it, and assaulted it. The Lord gave Lachish into the hand of Israel, and he took it on the second day, and struck it with the edge of the sword, and every person in it, as he had done to Libnah. 33. The king of Horan of Gezer came up to help Lachish, and Joshua struck him and his people, leaving him no survivors. From Lachish Joshua passed on with all Israel to Eglon, and they laid siege to it and assaulted, and they took it that day and struck it with the edge of the sword. And every person in it he utterly destroyed that day, and he had done as he had done to Lachish. Then Joshua went up with all Israel from Eglon to Hebron. They insulted and took it and struck it with the edge of the sword, and its king and its towns and every person in it. He left no one remaining, just as he had done to Eglon. He utterly destroyed it with every person in it. Then Joshua with all the Israelites returned back to Gibeon and insulted, and he took it with his king and all his town. They struck them with the edge of the sword, and utterly destroyed every person in it. He took no one remaining. He left no one remaining, just as he had done to Hebron, and as he had done to Libnah and his king, as he did to Debir and his king. 40. So Joshua defeated the whole land, the hill country, and the Negev, and the lowland, and the slope, and all their kings. He left no one remaining, but utterly destroyed all that breathed, as the Lord God of Israel commanded. 41. And Joshua defeated them from Kadesh Bareh to Gaza, and all the country of Gashon, as far as Gibeon. Joshua took all these kings in their land at one time, because the Lord God of Israel fight for Israel. 43. Then Joshua returned, and all Israel with him, to the camp at Gilgal. Okay. Okay. Let's continue on. Victory at Gilgal. Right? Victory at Gibeon. I'm sorry. Victory at Gibeon. So let me give you a review of chapter 10. Defense of Gibeon in a southern campaign. That's chapter 10, verse 1 to 39. Okay, review. Defense of Gibeon in a southern campaign. Gibeon is faced with the threat of a coalition headed by the king of Jerusalem on verse 1 to 5. Joshua and Israel fulfill their treaty obligation and repel the attractor, the tracker, thanks to another intervention by the divine commander in verse 6 to 11. The later point is emphasized in a flashback in verse 12 to 14. The primary storyline then resume with the capture of the allied king in verse 16 to verse 27. To all of this is appended another older unit in verse 28 to 39, which focus on town destroyed in the south. The units are strung together in a logical sequence without any attempt to harmonize differences. This description of the southern campaign seemed to make sense militarily. The Vedat national effect is to present the victories in the south as an unplanned offshot of Yahweh's third interventions since the crossing of the Jordan. Okay? I want you to read chapter 6, verse 1, until you get to this chapter we are reading, chapter 10, verse 43. Okay? You go watch the video from chapter 6 until you finish watching this video. Now, the treaty with Gibeon and the combined might of 5 city-states posed the greatest of odds against Israel. That's in verse 1 to verse 15. Now let's start doing the individual verses. Yes, individual verses. Jerusalem, by this time mentioned here for the first time in the Bible, it is the only member of the coalition that escaped a raid, even though its king is eliminated in the defeat of the coalition. Jerusalem remained a Canaanite town until its takeover by King David. Okay. News of Israel's success motivate enemies' action. I want you to take time to go back and read so you could compare this story with the one I'm telling you that we did. Some of them we did so far. Joshua 5 verse 1, Joshua 9 verse 1 and 2, and Joshua 11 verse 1 and 3. Okay? I want you to compare it. Now, in verse 2, He became greatly frightened because Gibeon was a large city, like one of the royal cities, and was larger than I, and all its men were warriors. Israel treaty with Gibeon threatened Jerusalem northern approaches. Okay, now Gibeon as a large city is an exaggeration, but in keeping with the monarchical proportions of Israel that are assumed by the editor, right? Editors in Deuteronomy 1, Deuteronomy 2, okay? 31 royal cities in western Palestine, about 31 royal cities in western Palestine alone are listed in Joshua 12, verse 7 to 34. You talk about warriors, okay? The Hebrew refers to men trained in combat and prosperous enough to be able to afford such activity. In effect, knights. Gibeon was a notable Israelite. For some examples, I want you to look at Judges 6, verse 12. Judges 6, verse 12. Let's continue with verse 3. So King Adoni Zedek of Jerusalem sent a message to King Horan of Hebron, to King Piran of Jarmuth, to King Japhia of Lachish, and to King Debir of Eglon, saying, these four cities are south and west of Jerusalem. They are south and west of Jerusalem. In Judges 1 verse 10, capture of Hebron is credited to Judah. Hebron, with a monarchical tradition going back to the 17th century BCE, figures prominently in the stories of Israel ancestors, especially Abraham and Sarah in Genesis 3 and Genesis 13, verse 18, and Genesis 18, verse 1, Genesis 23, verse 19. Okay? Hebron, too, had a heavy concentration of non-Semitic people. The local kingdom dismantled the early Israel were mostly of recent and alien origin. Jarmuth, the first of three towns situated in the north-south line, in the foothill separating the central mountain range from the coastal road. Lachish was a fortified town already half a millennium old. when it was destroyed in the mid 20th century BCE. It is hard to comprehend this date in the 13th century description at Hazar in chapter 11 as both failing within one man's lifetime. It appears that the emergence of Israel out of prolonged struggles for better life in Canaan has been stylized as occurring all under Joshua's exemplary leadership. Regarding King Gibeon of Eglon, the tradition may be garbled. Gibeon is a place name in verse 38 and verse 39. And also in chapter 15, verse 7, and chapter 21, verse 15. Location of Eglon is unknown. Possibly tell Aton. Now, let's continue on to verse 5. Then the five king of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon gathered their forces and went up with all their armies and camped against Gibeon and made war against it. Amorites, often a synonym for Canaanites, may here retain its etymological sense. Westerners. Verse 6. And the Gibeonites sent to Joshua at the camp of Gilgal, saying, do not abandon your servant. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us. For all the king of the Amorites who live in the hill country are gathered against us. All the king of the Amorites is an exaggeration to motivate Israel response. Okay? Just try to make Israel move. Verse 8. The Lord said to Joshua, do not fear them, for I have handed them over to you. Not one of them shall stand before you. The Lord said, presupposes oracular consultation, presumably by some such means as the sacred dice, Urim and Thummim. Here the Israelites do not repeat the mistake for which they are faulted earlier in Joshua 9 verse 14 and verse 9. So Joshua came up upon suddenly, having marched up all the night from Gilgal. A forced march all night is plausible, as in the siege of Ai. a straight line distance of about 32 kilometers, but a treacherous twisting climb, mostly uphill, out of the Jordan Valley. Verse 10. And the Lord threw them into a panic before Israel, who inflicted a great slaughter on them at Gibeon, chasing them by the way of the ascent of Beth Horon, and struck them down as far as Azekah and Makkedah. Panic is the standard weapon of the divine warrior. When you look at Exodus 14, verse 24, and Judges 7, verse 21 to verse 22, the pursuit extends westward from Gibeon down through the pass at the accent of Beth Horon, then far southward. Okay. And the Lord threw, chased, and struck. It was Yahweh's victory, not Joshua or Israel. The accent of Beth Horon, also known as the Valley of Ai was a was a major access route from the northern Shephelah to the hill country. Azekah is identified with Tel Zachariah, the location of Makkedah, somewhere in the northern Shephelah, is unknown to us. Now, verse 11. As they fled before Israel while they were going down the slope of Beth Horon, the Lord threw down huge stones from heaven on them as far as Azekah, and they died. There were more who died because of hailstones than the Israelite killed with with the sword. Weather phila- ph- phenomena, also weapon of the divine warrior. When you look at Isaiah 30 verse 30, okay, the Lord will use weather to strike. Now, stones from heaven seem to be an unusually severe and unreasonable hailstone. The coastal plain receives 5 to 8 days of hail per year, mostly in mid winter. Now, verse 12 to verse 14. On the day when the Lord gave the Amorites over to the Israelites, Joshua spoke to the Lord, and he said in the sight of Israel, sun stand still at Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ajalon, and the sun stood still, and the moon stopped. until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. And is this not written in the book of Jasher? The sun stopped in mid-heaven and did not hurry to set for about a whole day. 14. There has been no day like it before or since, when the Lord heeded a human voice, for the Lord fought for Israel. Okay. The sun stands still. In verse 12 to verse 13. A prose framework enclosed the reinterpreted and older poetic texts from the book of Jasher. And I want you to look at 2 Samuel 1 verse 18 so you could understand. According to the framework, Joshua requests to the Lord in verse 12 for extended daylight, caused the sun to stop and its moon position in mid-heaven in verse 13 and delay its setting. The poem itself actually addressed the moon and sun, not God. The poet called upon them to freeze and stun amazement at the scope of Israel's victory. I want you to look at Exodus 15 verse 16 and Habakkuk 3 verse 11 and verse 14 that the Lord fought for Israel perfectly summarize the divine warrior's tradition. Amen. Mm. The main thought here is of Yahweh's responsive to a human's voice. The narrative incorporates an older poetic fragment in which sun and moon are collaborators rather than subordinates serving in the heavenly army. When you look at Habakkuk 3 verse 11, hopefully you did that already. How the stars fought from heaven against Syria and against Sisera in Judges 5 verse 20. Probably being regarded as the source of rain that produced a providential flash flood. That's Judges 5 verse 20. Please read that. And Habakkuk 3 verse 11. Read that too. Now, with a restoration from the Greek version, the introduction to the poem become chiastic. Successive lines repeat ideas in reverse order. Then Joshua appealed to the Lord on the day God gave the Amorites over to the Israelites. Parallel when he, that is the Lord, attacked them. at Gibeon. They were smitten before Israel. Though the next line, we in verse 12, he, that is the Lord, said in the sight of Israel, began the poetic fragment. Verse 13, we go again. Perhaps sun and moon were ordered to cover opposite escape route from the past until the nation took vengeance on their enemies is better translated until he, the Lord, defeats his army forces to take vengeance, which in the human scene, which in the human sense means taking the law into one's own hand, is far from the meaning of the Hebrews here. The same consonant for the nation in Hebrew also spelled the military word for a fighting force. The book of Jasher is also quoted in 2 Samuel 1 verse 18 to 27. The King David poetic lament over the death of Saul and Jonathan, that the sun did not set for about a whole day, represents a liberal misreading of the poem in verse 14. That the Lord fought for Israel may thus be understood in terms of providential hailstones seriously impeding the retreat of coalition forces, giving the advantage to Joshua. Let's continue on with verse 15. Verse 15. Executing the 5 kings. Okay? We're going to talk about executing 5 kings. Verse 15. Then Joshua returned, and all Israel with him, to the camp of Gilgal. The verse is probably a gloss supplied by a scribe who did not recognize verses 12 to verse 14 as a digression or flashback, because then Joshua returned and all Israel with him to the camp at Gilgal. We already knew that all Israel would be returning to the camp at Gilgal the minute we know that the Lord was with them and he had handed them over to Israel. That means not one of the Israelites would die in battle. Okay? Now, verse 16 to verse 27. Oh, so sorry. Talk about the executing of the 5 kings. Verse 16. Meanwhile, these 5 kings fled and hid themselves in the cave at Makkedah. Okay. The sequel to the prose account of the root of the Southern Confederacy. The emphasis shift, ironically, away from Yahweh's salvific action into onto Israel's military achievements. Makedah was the southernmost limit of the military flight, limit of the enemy's flight in verse 10, and the starting point to the final phase of the campaign in verse 28. Okay? Please read verse 10 and verse 28. Joshua 10, verse 17 to verse 21. Verse 17 to verse 21. With the five kings, hidden in the cave at Makedah, the opposing forces were in a leadership rout and failed, for the most part, to find refuge inside the fortified town. Inside the fortified town. Verse 20. In spite of Joshua's energetic pursuit, in verse 19, survivors do escape to the fortified town, though thus setting up the need for attack on Lachish, Eglon, and Gibeon in verse 11. Now in verse 31, sorry, not verse 11, verse 31, verse 34, and verse 36. 31, 34, and 36. Now in verse 21, the emphasis is on Israel increasing military prowess. Okay? 21. All the people returned safe to Joshua in the camp at Makedah. No one dared to speak against any of the Israelites. Now, 24. For the manner of execution, feet on their neck. Figurative use. When you look at Psalm 110, verse 1. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 25 to verse 28. Look at that so you could see a little bit better. Okay. The enemy's king symbolized total victory when they had stepped their feet on the king's neck. Total victory. Crush their neck. Now, verse 25. It said, do not be afraid. In inclusion with verse 8. Right? Also, Joshua 1, verse 7, and also verse 9. Do not be afraid. Verses 26. This is not a death by hanging, but public exposure of corpse after execution so as to inspire fear on the enemy. Okay? Exposing the enemy's body was a humiliating insult. When you look at 1 Samuel 31, verse 10, 2 Samuel 4, verse 12, Joshua obeyed, right? Deuteronomy 21, verse 22 to 23. They had to come down before sunset. They could spend the day in hanging, but their body cannot stay hanging all day, all night until the next day. If not, it would pollute the land that they was in, and that would be a curse for Israel. So they had to remove the body before sunset and bury it and throw it away, stone it, whatever. But the body could not stay on the tree all day and all night. Okay? Now, uh-huh. The large stones were probably a well-known landmark. When you look at Joshua 7, verse 26, and Joshua 8, verse 29. 28 to 39. Let me do a quick review on that. I'm not going to read all that verse. I'm just going to do the review. It is impossible to fully harmonize this account of the campaign in the South with the description of the coalition in verse 1 to 5 because of the way the compiler choose to work by putting together reform literacy unit. Verse 28, destroyed, right? He said destroy. He utterly destroyed every person. Destroyed. Destroy, Hebrew root Shem. That's CHRM. Right? If you look at Joshua 6, verse 17. Let me look at Joshua 6, verse 17 for you. I feel like I have to do that. Go back. The city and all that is in it shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her and her house shall live, because she hid the messenger we sent. Devoted to the Lord for destruction. The Hebrew term Sherem refers to an ad hoc decree in Leviticus 27, verse 28-29. It was not an exclusively Israelite word or practice. In Israel, it has been suggested the Sherem may be understood in connection with efforts at disease control, epidemic disease, especially bubonic plague, was not uncommon in the aftermath of warfare. Okay? Let's continue on. Mhm. In verse 30, skipping over the king of Ai. Okay, the king of Ai, to get to the king of Jericho, whose fate is otherwise not described. Contribute to closure on the account of warfare in the south. Now, 31. Three cities, Lachish, Eglon, Hebron, were part of the earlier coalition, but Jerusalem and Jarmuth, in verse 3, are not attacked. No mention is made of the king of Lachish or Eglon. They were already they have already been killed in verse 23 and verse 26. Now, verse 33. Gezer is not captured. It did not become part of Israel until the reign of Solomon in 1 King 9 verse 16 to 17. Okay? 1 King 9 verse 16 to 17. That's verse 33. One King Horam of Gezer only now joined the action and is the only one mentioned by name in this recapping of success in the South. There is a tension, but no necessary contradiction between this text and other passages in chapter 16, verse 10, and also Judges 1, verse 29. That's Joshua 16, verse 10. We fought the tribe of Ephraim for failure to oust the Canaanites from Gezer. Gezer only became Israelites and Solomon reigned as a dowry that came with Pharaoh's daughter. Okay, in verse 33, 34. Verse 34. The location of Eglon is uncertain. Perhaps Tel Etam, Aitum, Tun, Etam. Let's do verse 26 to verse 29, verse 36 to verse 39 review. Let's do, yes. Now, in Joshua 14, verse 6 to 15, Caleb is credited with victory at Hebron. And I also want you to look at Joshua 15, verse 13 to 14. But it is likely that charge the town changed hands more than once. The specification is towns, satellite villages, is made only for Hebron and Debir. The former is made only for Hebron. The former remain archaeologically little known due to continuous modern occupation. The name of Debir was formerly Kiriath Sefer. That's Kiriathsepher. According to Judges 1 verse 11, which may be read as town of the treaty still, suggesting something of a southern counterpart to the role of Shechem in the north in Joshua 8 verse 30 to verse 35, and also in chapter 24, Joshua 24. Debir is probably the small hill country site of Quebec, Rubad, where again only restricted area could be excavated, but no pertinent destruction stratum has been found. In verse 37, the mention of King Hebron seemed to contradict verses 23 and verse 26. Verse 41. This describe the land conquered so far. The south boundary runs east to west from Kadesh Barnea to Gaza. Southward is extended as far as Gibeon. The extent of the country Gashan in Joshua 11 verse 16, perhaps in Joshua 15 verse 51 is unknown. Unknown. Now, let's finish off and do 42 verse 43. In editorial summary that like Joshua 9 verse 1 and 2, with which it framed the story about the Gibeonites, covers both more or less than what is reported in the close narrative. In verse 40 you see, the Negev is the southern desert stretching from the foot of the Judean hill country into the northern Sinai Peninsula, that he utterly destroy all that breathe is a rhetorical exaggeration characteristic of the monarchical edition in Deuteronomy 1. It overlooks previous statement to the contrary in various units. I hope this story in Joshua 10 was helpful to you. You at least had a little maybe get a little bit more understanding on the Bible and also on other references that goes along with the Bible in the verses that we just read together. Hopefully, it will help you grow your faith on the Lord and increase your understanding that the Lord will fight for you and the Lord already have you under control. Yes. So, may you be blessed. May your family be blessed. May everything that you touch be blessed. In Jesus' name. Peace be unto you in your home. Don't forget to like this page, subscribe to this page, and also donate to our ministry so we could continue to help those who are in need, especially after the experience we had today. We realized not everybody like to help those in need because they stole the trailer that hold all our supplies for the needy today, and we set us back because we had nothing to give out today, which is not good. Now we have to start all over again to get another trailer, get more supply. Hopefully we find it. Hopefully we're praying that we find it, and the person return it with everything in it. But that's a stretch. But we need to get new supplies, a new trailer, so we continue the work that we do. And we cannot let the enemy win. It's not the time for the enemy to have victory over us. It's for us to show the enemy, you know what, we are serving a mighty God. You may have stole our trailer, but guess what? God will provide us with a better trailer, and with no problems we could easily drive it off a whole lot better and more supplies to help those in need. But I'm counting on you and your donations to do that so we'll move forward into our next step, because this is not the time for us to be without the trailer, because we need it. We desperately need it. And a police report was done, so hopefully we're able to find it. Hopefully we're able to find it. Since we did a police report, hopefully they will be at the lookout for it. But with the way things are, it's gonna be. I'm not saying I'm not being optimistic. I'm just being truthful. With the way things are, and the police force is so busy trying to fight big crimes, I'm sure they're not gonna be looking for the camper. The police report is just made. So I hope they make the mistake of trying to register it at UMB and the police and it show up as stolen items. I don't know. Anyway, may the Lord be with you. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord protect you. In Jesus' name, peace be unto you. Shalom.